Welcome back to another episode of the Shema podcast. My friends, I have an episode, a guest lined up that I am so excited to learn about and have the ability for him to share his wisdom with us. You know, when I think about the purpose of this podcast, it sort of says it in the description of it is to teach people the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvos. I really have taken this podcast on as a selfish purpose because I've always looked at Torah Judaism and Torah as a way that has the infinite internal creator's wisdom and a way to apply it towards our life, to actualize our potential and our unique mission in the world. But as we've discussed in this podcast a lot, it can be quite challenging. You know, I've heard the analogy of we're like a rider and a horse. Our neshama is the rider, our body is the horse. And sometimes we forget that we are the rider. We think we are the horse and it's galloping around and we have no control over it. There's this world where we are constantly inundated with this stimuli. And by default, we have responses to that stimuli. You know, if you want to see how we operate in the default, it's by observing an infant. They don't get something they want and they immediately start screaming and crying. And I will tell you that many moments throughout the day, I see that I have not evolved much since my days as an infant. But we can see, you know, in that gap, there is a gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap is where our free will resides. And that is what defines us. I had a dear friend, a friend of the podcast, David Block, at my home over Shabbos. And he gave me a book, an amazing book, the commentary by Rabbi Moshe Feinstein on the Parsha. And we were talking about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. And we were sharing a story about him when he was elderly. And he was being escorted to his car. And the gentleman put him in the car. He closed the car door. The driver drove off. And when they went around the corner, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said, "Would you mind pulling over?" And the driver said, "Of course, Rabbi." And he pulls over and he says, "Now, would you mind coming around and opening the car door?" And he said, "Of course." And he comes around the car door and finds that his hand was trapped, smashed between the frame of the car. And he opened the car door and said, "Rabbi, why didn't you say something earlier?" And the rabbi said, "Well, I didn't want to embarrass the man that closed the door on my hand." Now, this is an example of someone that has really changed the default programming, because if that happened to me, I'd be yelling out so many explicitives. But this is a lot of the work we are trying to accomplish. The other thing we've talked quite a lot about is our thoughts. Our thoughts are what originate everything in our world around us. And I was discussing in the last episode, the Rabbi Nachman teaching that the way he was really able to harness the Yetzer Hara, meaning not to destroy it, but like we say in the Shema, to love Hashem with both our hearts, our Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov, is he realized that the Yetzer Hara controls the imagination. And the more we can elevate the imagination from its grips from Sitra Achra, which the definition of that means Emunah, the more we are using our imagination in the correct way. So the reason I'm excited about our guest, Rabbi Aryeh Siegel, is because he wrote a book called Kosher Calm, about meditation. And I'm telling you that the techniques he teaches in this book are things that will greatly help us in our pursuit of actualizing our potential, learning how to control that gap in between stimulus and response, elevating our thoughts to positivity and the things that will, again, help us achieve our unique missions in the world.
Welcome to the Shema Podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights intertwined through personal stories as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. Now to the show.
Rabbi Aryeh Siegel, thank you so much for joining us.
Look, after that introduction, there's really not very much for me to say. We could stop right now.
I don't think so. I've just begun to delve into the book and actually haven't begun to implement the practices, although I did begin today. We'll talk a little more about the video you made, which was very helpful in introducing this idea. I will say, Rabbi, when I did this, I did realize that we sometimes forget that we are human beings and not human doers, because it almost felt like guilty. Like I just sit here and do nothing. I don't even use my mind to be productive. It's something it's probably challenging for a lot of us A plus type personality people out there.
That's the world we live in. But the reality is, through history, is that every culture has had a way to disconnect from the hubbub of life and settle down into something quiet and calm. And in fact, if you look at the patriarchs, there was a reason they were all shepherds. They were, except for Joseph in Egypt, who was able to master being able to be a complete full Jew in the midst of the most deprived society in the world and at that time and take it over. So he led the path for us to be able to exist in an urban culture and still be full-fledged Jews. But the patriarchs, all of them were shepherds. And the reason they were shepherds was that they were able to commune with God and disconnect and be able to use that time for spiritual practices. We live in a world where there's a big problem with stress and stimulus overload. Everybody's so familiar with it. I don't even need to repeat it. We all know what it is. And a lot of people, because there's so much discussion about this, are very familiar with something that people weren't familiar with 15, 20 years ago, which is called the flight or fight response. That was basically discovered really about 100 years ago at Harvard by a researcher named Walter Cannon. And he was the first to identify it. And basically it's an evolutionary survival technique that's built into the body that when we're under threat, we get ready to deal with the threat. So a lot of things happen in our autonomous nervous system. Blood starts going more quickly. We get a shot of adrenaline, or we start breathing more quickly. All of this is basically to enable us to fight whatever's attacking us potentially, or to run away, or to just stand still and be able to hold our own position, and hopefully the threat goes away. The problem is that in today's world, that flight or fight response is stimulated so frequently by problems with making a living, stress with kids, stress with shalom bayis, stress with the jobs, traffic. Just October 7th, what's going on in Israel that affects every Jew everywhere in the world. And it's and the constant 24-hour unstopping news stream and all these things that go on. It basically takes this, what was a evolutionary defense that was really good for us, and by frequently overloading it, the system can't handle it, and we basically begin to break down, and we get stress overloads, and the body breaks down at its weakest point. So we basically have people who are having anxiety issues. You have with stomach problems, with whatever it is, whatever the system is weakest, that's where it breaks down. And fortunately, there's about, I think at this point in 1970, a Harvard researcher named Herbert Benson identified an opposite response in the body that he termed the relaxation response. And on every single parameter, the relaxation response is the opposite of the flight or fight response. And so he initially studied people who were doing transcendental meditation, which was very popular at that time. He was asked to study their physiology during meditation, which he did. And essentially he discovered that there was essentially what he called the fourth state of consciousness. We're familiar with waking, dreaming, sleeping. He, through physiological studies, he found a state of restful alertness. And what that meant was that the body was resting after about 10 minutes in experienced meditators at a point profoundly deeper than the deepest part of deep sleep, which is at 5 or 6 hours. But the people who were meditating and resting at that level were totally mentally alert. They even like a heightened alertness. So that was something that wasn't, nobody really knew anything about. And he felt as a physician that this could have tremendous benefit for being the antidote to stress. And then he spent the rest of his life studying this phenomenon. And basically, he has essentially become the father of mind-body medicine because of his promotion of this technique.
That's amazing. So the body was, while awake, was at a more restful state, you're saying, than when they were sleeping, or as at a restful state?
Not as, profoundly deeper. So
Wow.
In my book, I go through all this, the science and the research, the physiology. It's on every parameter of rest. Meditating within a few minutes is profoundly deeper than the deepest part of deep sleep. And this is something that he discovered could be triggered through a meditation technique. Now, what's very, very interesting is that initially he studied transcendental meditation. And I know that you know from my background and looking at my book that I was actually a transcendental meditation teacher. I did meditation and yoga 4 hours a day during the 70s. And for 5 years, I was a TM teacher, TM short for transcendental meditation, worked for the national organization for 5 years until I became a little questioning of the methods that they used, and I left. But that's another story, and we'll get that later. But what Benson discovered, being a researcher, was he said, okay, great, we have something that works, but not everybody's going to do this meditation stuff. There's like this, first of all, it's Eastern, there's gurus, there's initiations, there's all kinds of baggage that goes with it. And I need something that can trigger the response without all the other stuff. So he spent a year studying cultures all over the world and found, as I talked about with the patriarchs, he found every single culture that he studied had a way of disconnecting from the ongoing demands of their life, whatever those demands were, whether it was through different kinds of mushrooms or counting rosary beads or different forms of meditation, whatever it was, every single culture he studied had a way of disconnecting. Now, then he decided he's going to look at the elements of the TM technique, which he was studying, and he said, look, I'm going to hypothesize that the initiation that to learn this meditation has nothing to do with the effect. I'm also going to hypothesize that the sounds that they use, the mantras, are not necessary to achieve the effect. So he came out with using the number one. He used the technique of TM with the number one instead of their mantras and no initiation. And he found that the physiological response of the body on every single parameter was exactly the same as the TM meditation. And he wrote a book called The Relaxation Response in 1975. That book, by the year 2000, had sold well over 4 million copies, was a New York Times bestseller for over 2 years, translated into 13 languages, and was the number one recommended book by physicians for self-help for probably 5 years. So he had an amazing impact. And then he set up, with help from the owner of the Boston Red Sox, Mr. Henry, the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine at Harvard. And they did about 100 studies so far on the effects of this relaxation response on health and mental health and well-being. So I'll stop there.
So a couple of things, the fight or flight, I see really problematic in our modern era, that default programming, because, I share that idea with one of the things I do is I teach a macroeconomics class to the seniors at the yeshiva here. And before test day, they get a little test anxiety. And I told them, the body will, if you feel anxious, will go into that fight or flight mode. Problem is it sends all your blood to your extremities, because back then the problem was the ferocious tiger coming at you, that you either run from or choose to, or the animal you want to chase after and kill and eat. So when it goes to your extremities, it leaves your mental faculties. So I would always tell them just be chill, you know. So it seems like in today's era, when most of our challenges are intellectually bound in our professions and are with our family and all these things, that we're really depleting the one faculty, our mind, when we need it the most. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that stress is debilitating on every single level. And the mind and body are connected. So you can't have something that's like debilitating the body without the mind being affected as well. So I think you're onto something. And I think that this is one of the reasons why, like Harvard University Medical School encourages interns and residents to do the relaxation response, because they are dealing with constant levels of stress and long hours and really impossible conditions. And they recognize the need to have something in their toolbox to deal with it. So yeah, it's very helpful.
Before we move on too far, I did want to have you delineate the kosher versus non-kosher, because it sounds like what you're saying, what was the non-kosher was that it was just the mantras, which were, I guess, based in idolatry, from what I understand from talking with you and from your book. Is there anything more to what made that non-kosher?
Let me give you context.
Okay.
Okay, when I was involved with TM, there was a guru, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Most people don't even know who he is at this point in time. But in the late 60s, early 70s, mid 70s, he was the guru to the Beatles. The Beatles went and spent 3 weeks in his ashram learning to meditate. Movie stars who were big at that time, Mia Farrow, Clint Eastwood, today Howard Stern. There's a lot of people who, or Oprah Winfrey, they would like promote it. But the problem with TM is that they are concerned with market share, and they are concerned with getting corporate and government funding. They want to be in these public schools. They want the Veterans Administration to pay for it. The problem that they have is that the mantras that they use, the sounds that they use, are the names of Hindu deities. So now we know that Makshava, with thought, on more refined, subtle levels, is more powerful. The closer you get to the source, the more powerful it gets. So as the mind settles down, and if somebody, God forbid, is repeating their mantras, which is are the names of Hindu deities, it becomes very, very problematic, because you open yourself up to stuff that we shouldn't be opening ourselves up to. Now, to give you an example you can relate to, when I say Hindu deities, so people, okay, it's the name of something. It's like, who knows what it is, Shiva or whoever these deities are in the Hindu religion. And by the way, I'm not saying anything wrong about Hinduism for Hindus. I'm just saying that, like, my main issue is deception. Tell people the truth, let them make an honest decision. And that's not what happens, because they're more concerned with market share, and it permeates everything that they do. So, for example, because I was in not because I was in the organization, but because I was a long-term practitioner, at certain intervals, you get what they call an advanced technique. You go through another initiation ceremony, and another word is added to your then existing mantra. So let's say, for example, my mantra, which it was the name of a Hindu deity, which at the time I got TM was not told to me. I didn't know about it. I was told it was a sound without meaning. Next, I get my advanced technique. The word nama, the Sanskrit word nama, is added to my mantra. Now, I don't know Sanskrit. I found out later that the word nama means I bow down. So now, at a very subtle level of my awareness, and don't forget, I'm meditating for years at that point in time, and for hours a day. I'm saying, I bow down to this Hindu deity. Now, that's extraordinarily problematic on every single level you can possibly imagine. Right. Now, if somebody goes into it with, this is a free country, and people can do whatever they want. But we are concerned about how much red food dye is in a candy, in a piece of candy. Don't you think people should have the right to know what they're getting involved with? They say, and TM is particularly problematic because it's been so popular, and even though it's not popular now, there still is this tremendous drive on their part to get into public schools and into the Veterans Administration and stuff like that.
Right. So it's big business, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, it's just well, when Maharishi died in 2008, he sent about the estate that went to his family in India was about $8 billion.
Wow.
And today it'd be like that. Today it'd be real money. So yeah. So yeah. And unfortunately, because of that, he really bankrupted the main teaching organizations. If he had not done that, TM would have like been everywhere. It'd been incredibly difficult to stop. But the other part of it that's problematic is the initiation ceremony. They say it's thanksgiving to the teachers or the gurus who preserve the knowledge, all these. There's not a word of thanksgiving in the ceremony. The entire ceremony is performed on an altar. There's an altar with a picture of a guru. There's different little vessels that hold various things that are used to make offerings during the ceremony. And it's a worship ceremony during which like 15 to 16 offerings are made to these gurus with bowing to the gurus. And at the end of the ceremony, the student who's learning it is encouraged to bow down to the guru. And it's a filled with incense and like it's really quite, if you're a Jewish person and you know what's going on, you're immediately repulsed by it. But they tell people that they're not participating, they're just a witness to it. But again, it's a lie. If you're familiar with the Hindu religion, there's a concept called dakshina. Dakshina means that like if somebody brings items that are used in an initiation ceremony, and in this case in TM, you are required to bring 2 pieces of fruit, flowers, white cloth, all of which are used in the ceremony, that changes your status in the Hindu religion from a witness to an active participant. And in the TM world, the purpose of the initiation ceremony is to bind the neshama of the person. They don't want not in the neshama because who knows what is there, but to bind the person to the guru. It's so deceptive and so over the top. But that's the problem.
I know you have a chapter in here on yoga because I remember I was researching whether yoga was kosher because its origins do come from idolatrous practices. But I think the ruling now in today's culture is that there's no more attachment of it to idolatrous practices. So it's okay to do yoga. It's my understanding because what you're describing is something that's very idolatrous where you're actually bringing offerings and submitting yourself to a deity.
Well,
but you told me you have a chapter in here devoted to that. I haven't gotten to it yet.
Yeah, I don't think you got to that chapter.
Okay.
I don't think you got that.
Well, since I brought it up, go ahead and share with us with regard to yoga. Is it kosher or not for a Jew?
Okay, so here's the issue. The issue
Okay.
with yoga, first of all, is the name itself means to unite. What are you uniting with? You're uniting to one of their deities. Okay. Every posture, I can't say pretty much every posture in yoga that has a name is either one of 2 things. It's the name of a Hindu deity, or it's the name of an animal. So, like the dog down is basically naming a dog and like trying to get into some kind of position that mimics that. So, first of all, obviously, things that have a name of a deity is not something we shouldn't be necessarily doing on that level, to call it by that name. And we don't imitate animals. That's not what we do as Jews. We're higher than that, so we don't do that. So that is an issue. And there's things like the sun salutation. That's like the 12-step posture workup that precedes most yoga classes, and repeated 3 times. Well, what is a sun salutation? It's like basically it was worshiping the sun. And if you do it on that, now obviously people aren't worshiping the sun when they do it, but essentially that's what it was. So people are imitating that. And then there's a lot of Jewish people who say, well, it's really what matters is intention. If I don't intend to worship this stuff, that's certainly I'm not worshiping the sun when I do this series of exercises. So it really has no impact on me. The problem is that intention isn't the whole game in Judaism. So, for example, if I do an action that's in the form of worshiping an idol, even if I'm doing it to ridicule and mock that idol, I am still guilty of that avera of idol worship. If I drop $1 out of my pocket and I don't even know I've dropped it out of my pocket, it's just gone. I have no intention of anything. It's just lost it, not even aware of it. Somebody picks that up and I get credit for a mitzvah of giving tzedakah. There was no intention. It just was that I dropped $1 out of my pocket. So intention is not a great argument. The issue is that there are probably a couple of million Jews doing yoga in the world, or will be doing it. It's extraordinarily popular, and it has a lot of benefit. There's no question about it. So Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg at the Gan and I Institute in Israel has been the one who's really talked most about this. And his main point is that there's nothing wrong with the exercises, with the stretches. The problem is calling them by their Hindu names and describing them that way. So he's saying, just like don't use their names. It's very simple. If somebody's looking like I'm not an expert at the names anymore. I lost them, thank God, many, many years ago. But like there's something called close to like the Bhagavad twist, right? You say what it is it's a half spinal twist. People understand, just say, we're doing a half spinal twist, and that's it. You can describe what the dog down position is without saying dog down. You can do all these things in a way that doesn't enliven that aspect of it that is the avodah part of it. So that's one aspect. What's very, very interesting is that there is actually a good friend of mine named Rabbi Dror Shaul, who's in Dharamsala, India. And he has been working with Rabbi Ginsburg in doing a series of postures that have the same benefits as what we're talking about, but in the form of the Hebrew alphabet. And it's really something that's they're working on very strongly. And I have a website, it's kind of in its infancy, called koshercalm.org, O-R-G. And I hope to include his postures and stretches as part of it. I'm also including the animations that we'll talk about later on how to do kosher meditation, and also some breathing techniques, one from Rabbi Ginsburg and working on another one from a Rabbi Dov Ber Pinson that will be there as well. Plus a lot of information about how to do this kosher meditation. So yeah, I'm sorry to burst your bubble.
No, that's fine. I'm glad you clarify that, because it does sound like we're commanded to do a mitzvah, even if we're not feeling it, even if the intention's not there. Like, you still show up and daven or putting your tefillin, right? Because eventually you will do it with intention. And I think maybe that's saying, if you're doing these things, well, that's not my intention. If you're saying those names, it may lead to the intention. Is that the concern from a Torah perspective?
Well, I don't think it has to lead anywhere. I think the reality is that at the moment you're doing it, it's a problem.
Okay.
It's just like, and it doesn't have to be done that way. In writing my book, if you're really interested in yoga, I'm going to give a plug to a woman named Shelley Denby, Denby, who wrote a book called Struggling with Yoga, Dancing. I'm not really sure what it is, but if you just Google yoga and Shelley Denby, she was a frum woman who was doing yoga, and then all of a sudden she realized that a lot of the stuff she was doing was extremely problematic, and she has adopted her practice to conform with halakha. There was another woman who contacted me who lived in a yoga ashram for 30 years. And then she became more religious, and she basically is doing her workshops according to the guidelines of Rabbi Ginsburg. Basically we do the same stretches, but call them different names. That's right. Really, and don't call it yoga. That's problematic.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Can be, I look like I'm not a yoga person. I'm a weightlifter, but when you think about where did weightlifting originate, it originated from Greece.
Yeah.
And their idolatry was the human body, pretty much. Yeah, but by but we can, as Jews, elevate these things from these other cultures. And it seems like that's what even your colleagues are doing with the area of yoga, is to change the name, keep the exercises, but
Well,
bring some terminology. Is that correct?
yeah, clearly the Indians, Hindus have done the most with the stretches and the breath work, pretty much of anybody. And so, like, we need to take what's useful to us and leave the other stuff behind, which is basically what I've done with the meditation technique that I'm presenting. It's essentially it's very close to the Benson relaxation response. It has similarities with some of the TM technique, but it's not like the technique was unique to TM. This was a technique that is found throughout India. It's taught throughout India with variations of mantras and initiation ceremonies. But the technique is very, very simple, which we'll get into a little bit later, but I'll just tell you in 2 sentences. All the technique is thinking a focus word that you choose. And as you think it to yourself, you're going to find, because the mind is filled with thoughts, that your mind is going to drift off onto a thought. At a certain point, you're going to have an awareness. Oh, I'm not thinking my focus word. I'm thinking I'm off on a thought. You come back to the focus word. And that is like the entire process. This thinking a focus word, recognizing I'm off on a thought, coming back to the focus word. That process is exactly the process that's used probably in 90% of the meditations in India. And it has the ability to settle the mind down. When the mind settles down, the body settles down, and it gets a very, very profound state of rest. That's what this whole thing is in a nutshell. It was really something I believe that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was looking for since 1962, but never quite got this. He never was happy with what he found. And I'll go into some of that detail.
Yeah, I'd like you to tell a little bit of the backstory, because back when you were into this transcendental meditation, is before you became a rabbi, correct? And then you sort of got this call to action to find a kosher version of this. I think through your inspiration, or I think did you communicate with the Rebbe on this?
Well, the first time I saw the Rebbe was in 1978. I was my friend and Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz, known as Schwartzy. We had a long history of learning together the Tanya, which is like the Bible of Hasidic thought.
Right.
And he took me to see the Rebbe in 1977. I was there for the morning prayers, and then in the afternoon prayer. You have to understand that Chabad was much smaller then. And so the afternoon prayers were like upstairs in a small shul, and I was on very, very pretty close proximity to the Rebbe. Wasn't able to really say anything to him. And he took me downstairs to be on the walkway as the Rebbe was going home, as he came out of the building. And he looked at me and he said, good Chodesh. It was like Rosh Chodesh. I have a good Chodesh, good month. And it was like a 2-second interaction. At that very time that he said that to me, I was doing transcendental meditation and yoga and reading Hindu scriptures 4 hours a day. And simultaneously, we were becoming frum. We were kashrus, kids in Jewish schools, mikvah, you name it, we were doing it. And like simultaneously, we kept this up, and nobody told us that there was a problem. I was like, really, it was later on, I was kind of like wondering, because we were connected with a lot of serious rabbis in the Chabad world, and nobody said there was an issue. So,
well, do they know?
Well, that's what's very interesting. You said, like, how did I get involved with this? So here I am, this TM teacher, merely meditating 4 hours a day, and basically it became, I think, like more effort than it was worth after a certain point in time, which I think a lot of people find. But I was still doing it, maybe getting a little lackadaisical with it. I had a bunch of kids, thank God, and I was working. I was in a PhD program at UCLA. I was like, whatever. And so what happened was the way I stopped was not because of anything any rabbi said to me. My wife was away at a family simcha in Montreal. I saw a sign on a in a window of a store or someplace that there was a rabbi in town who was a makubal, and like somebody who's into Jewish mysticism, and he would tell you what's going on in your life by reading the mezuzahs in your house. And I'm always interested in something new, so I took down. We had a lot of French doors, so I took down 32 mezuzahs and I put them in a shopping bag, and I made an appointment to meet with him. And I didn't speak a word of Hebrew. I still speak very, very little. And he did not speak probably a word of English, but there was an interpreter between us. And so when it came my turn, I waited about 15, 20 minutes. I went into the small room, and the setup was that I'm sitting like on a kind of a bench, and he's about 5 feet in front of me. And he doesn't even look at me, really. He's just takes my bag of mezuzahs, and he's wearing these big glasses. And look like, I'm assuming they were big magnifying glasses. Over his left shoulder is like a really bright light that's hitting the mezuzahs. And he's going like the one, and puts it down, another one. He did this to 10 mezuzahs, gets to the 11th mezuzah, and he's like looking at it, and he's looking at it, and he says, and he's struggling. I see he's struggling. He says, wow. Transcendental meditation. Looking at my mezuzah, didn't speak anything. I never said a word to him. Transcendental meditation. I look, and I've seen people say I almost fell off my stool. I fell off the seat. I was like stunned. I didn't know I could not believe this.
What was he seeing? What was he looking at? Because it's the same Hebrew letters written on every mezuzah.
Look, he's a makubal. Okay, so now you have to, what I think I realized was that the mezuzahs was like really a shtick in some way, that like he was getting some kind of communication from some
right.
place.
Gotcha. Wow.
So then he speaks to the interpreter, who then says to me, he's telling me that he wants me to tell you exactly what he's telling me without changing a word, to the best of my ability to communicate exactly what he's saying. Okay. He says, so they talk, and he says, he wants you to know that it's not his position or his role to tell you what to do. That's the first thing. Okay. The second thing is that he wants you to know that your soul is being confused. It doesn't know which direction to go into the direction of your meditation or to stay with Judaism. But you should consider doing a favor for your soul and making a decision.
Wow. That is wild.
That was pretty wild. So I said, okay. I said, tell him I'll take the Jewish one.
Right.
So that was the last time I meditated ever. Okay. That was doing other TM stuff.
Right.
Then he says, tell him, it seems to him, the makubal, that I have a lot of avodah in my house. I said, yes, I had a massive amount. I had books on every Hindu guru and the Bhagavad Gita. I also had a bunch of Jewish books also, because it's kind of like my library was like growing more Jewish and like proportionally but I said, yeah. He said, get rid of it. I said, can I give it away? He said, no, burn it. So you have to understand that this was like you don't have to understand, I'll just tell you. This was like mid-August on the hottest day in the history of Los Angeles in probably 8 or 9 years. And I have a fire going in my fireplace for 3.5 hours, tearing up books and burning the pages and photographs and the whole stuff, cleaned out my whole house.
Wow.
I did this without telling my wife, who was also doing the same thing I was doing. And I called her up. I told her what happened. She said, okay, I'll stop today too. And I said, really? She said, yeah. I said, I'm falling asleep in my meditation anyway. No big deal. So we both stopped the same day. So that was like in 1981, I guess, 1980, 81. So, and then we really, our lives just became totally observant from lives. And I never thought about TM again. Like literally, slowly but surely, our friends who are TM people, they kind of fell off of our radar. And it wasn't until 2015 that I first understood that the Lubavitcher Rebbe had ever spoken about meditation, had ever talked about developing a secular meditation to address stress that he said was extraordinarily important and that had nothing to do with foundational Jewish meditations like Hisbonenus or from the Zohar, from the Kabbalah. Totally just a method to learn how to deal with stress. And I had no idea about that. And then I found out why. And we can go into that also. But basically what happened was, again, contextually, at the time that in the mid-70s, TM was really extraordinarily popular. I remember going to this TV show called The Merv Griffin Show. He was like a talk show host. You're nodding like you remember. I was part of the entourage. So I went to all these, whenever Maharishi was in town, I was a part of the entourage. And we go to the show, and Maharishi was he was the entire show. Another show shortly after was with Mary Tyler Moore and Clint Eastwood, who were always doing TM. That year, it was called the Merv Griffin Wave. 300,000 people in America started TM. Now, you have to understand that, you don't have to understand, I'll just tell you. Basically, Jews probably represented 2% of the population in America. In every meditation movement that was going on, Jews were 30 to 40% of the population. That goes for the meditations, goes for the Sikhs, it's probably higher percentage. The Jews have a need to develop their spirituality, and they will, and it's really kind of uncontrollable. And if we don't know where to, in our own tradition, we look elsewhere. Right. And basically, at that time, very little of what's available to us online in the media, everywhere, in terms of like the deepest Jewish philosophy, Jewish thought, Hasidic philosophy, lectures, none of that was really available. It's just so this other thing filled the void for many people who essentially got involved with it due to stress, and then got into like the more guru aspects of it, and that was it. And that was extraordinarily troubling to the Rebbe, because now there were tens and tens and tens of thousands of Jews, young people and adults, who were getting involved in the most abject avodah you can imagine. And he wanted to do something about that.
Interesting. Yeah, it's true. Jews are always, I discussed that before with guests and things too. The Jewish neshama wants to express itself, and without Torah, it will go in all sorts of.
It's a big wide world. It's a big wide world out there. You can get lost in a lot of different places. People get lost in everything, so it's a problem.
Let me ask you, one of the questions that came to mind is that, everyone needs to detach. We have busy days and stuff. I find what most of us do, including me, is we decide to do a little distraction. Like my last hour of the day is just like turn something stupid on the streaming media and distract yourself as a way to escape. What would you say to someone that is their way of calming their mind by, because basically when you're watching something, not a lot of brain activity going on either, but compare and contrast the benefit of actually doing meditation versus just zoning out and watching some nonsense, which probably there's other typically issues with a lot of stuff that's on streaming media these days, but assuming it's something kosher to watch, but the additional benefits of meditating versus just distracting yourself.
Okay. So a big part of the book deals with research, basically the latest research on what's the effect of meditation on health and physical and mental health well-being. I can say from today to tomorrow that meditation is good for somebody. And for somebody who is highly stressed, and they're highly stressed because they are overwhelmed in work or with family issues or you tell them, okay, now take 10, 15, 20 minutes twice a day out of your life and meditate. They look at you like you're nuts. Well, how am I going to do that? Why would I do that? So I don't have the advantage in a book that, say, a therapist has, a psychotherapist or a physician or somebody even going to learn meditation. Because when somebody decides to go to see a therapist, they've already made a commitment to get well. They have made an appointment with somebody. They've researched who the best person is for their issue, best they can. They've made a time commitment. They make an appointment. They've committed to a certain level of therapy. They're paying a lot of money. So there's a decision there. I want to get better. Once the mind makes a decision to get better, it sets up a way for it to begin the healing process. This is the power of placebos. Placebos it's basically people have an idea that they're taking something that's going to make them better. And it doesn't really matter what's in it, because often the placebo works as well as the active treatment. In fact, it's so profound in terms of the mind ability to set up the healing that there's research now coming out of Harvard. There's a placebo institute studying placebos, that people can know that it's fake and it still is beneficial. You can tell somebody,
Interesting.
I'm giving you this pill and it's fake, okay? And you're going to take it, and probably 30-40% of the people get better knowing it's fake, because they think possibly it's because there's a ritual to taking medicine, and people are used to, I take this and I'm going to feel better. So the ritual starts the process in the brain to heal. The Rebbe very often when he gave a bracha to people, he'd say, "Trak good, v'zayin good." Think good, it will be good. So what does that mean? It means set up your mind in a positive way, and the goodness will follow. But you're already creating the condition to allow the bracha, the blessing, to settle in. And in my book, there's a chapter on positivity in terms of the research on it, and also the Rebbe's, how he implemented it. There's a chapter on building resilience. And we don't have a lot of time for the science, but I'll just give you one study that was done. There was a study at Harvard, the Harvard Mass General Hospital, which is a hospital affiliated with Harvard. Their HMO, their internal medical program for students and faculty and employees. And they did a study of 13,000 of that cohort, that group, and contrasted them with 4,000 people who received relaxation training, like the relaxation response of Benson, which basically, in my book, I'm doing a modification of that I think actually works better. But that was the group, and they studied them for 1 year. So it was a retrospective. They went back and they looked. How did they study them? They looked at medical care utilization. How many times did they visit the physician, go to the emergency room, have X-rays, hospitalizations, all these things, and they compared the 13,000 that didn't have the training with the 4,000 that did. Over a 1 year period, the people who had the relaxation training, which was about 8 hours of relaxation training, had a 43% overall decline in medical care utilization across everything: studies, physician visits, emergency room visits, lab procedures, X-rays, testing. The only thing I think the only thing that didn't decline was actually emergency room visits that usually were some kind of immediate thing that need to be dealt with. But a 43% decline in medical care utilization gives you an idea of how powerful this really is in terms of building resilience. I mean, the point is that when people get rid of stress, which this meditation is profoundly capable of doing if you do it as directed and give it a chance to work, then as you get rid of stress, it takes more to overwhelm you. The stress in this environment is going to be the same, but if you're stronger, it's going to impact you less. So that's basically what goes on here. So that's Yeah, that's the
That's
power.
amazing. I noticed you referenced a book I read a long time ago, the Biology of Belief,
Mhm.
where he basically documents that our thoughts do interact with our cellular tissue in our body. And it sounds like this meditation's another way to, again, to bring on positive thoughts, which do have profound influences on us. And it makes me think too, that the episode I did a couple episodes ago was on the idea of unifying the name Yud K with Vav K. I was like looking at, how many times in the Siddur and before we count the Omer, we talked about that, or talk about on that day, Hashem's name will be one, talking about in the era of Mashiach, that basically we'll be able to clearly see that everything was done for the good, that there was everything that has ever happened in our life, and the history of the Jewish people was all for the good. And that the way we can sort of unify the name now is to do our best to remove the gap between hidden good and revealed good in our life. To shrink that gap. When we see something like, I can't believe this happened, to train ourselves to say, this too is for the good. We just can't see it yet and get excited about it. And it sounds like in a quest to do that this meditation is a technique that can sort of help us in this area to get to this area of positivity, to where no matter what comes our way, we can sort of live in that a life of deeper emunah in all those encounters.
Well, I think there's really two different issues here.
Okay.
You can't say that the meditation leads to positivity. I think that's a separate issue, and I really have a whole chapter on positivity in my book.
Okay.
What the meditation does do is that if you are tied up with anxiety, you can't do anything well, including davening, including studying, including because your energy is dissipated and going into other places. So if you can get rid of that and center yourself so you don't have that anxiety, then you have focus, clarity, you can do anything you want. In terms of positivity, this was like one of the main things Lubavitcher Rebbe dealt with. And there was there's a Rabbi Kalmanson who wrote a book called The Positivity Bias. And with his permission, I lifted a number of the stories that he has in his book. I included them in an abbreviated way in my book. And I added some other ones as well. But like one of the things that there was a chassid who was very close with the Lubavitcher Rebbe named Junik. And he said to the Rebbe one day, how do you deal with what you deal with? Because you have to understand, the Rebbe grew up in this communist Russia. His father and mother were sent to Katis in like Siberia. He never saw his father again. He came out into France when it was being occupied by the Nazis. He lived through the Holocaust. He came here and was dealing with building the Lubavitch world with people who were coming here in like the mid to late 40s, early 50s, who were basically destroyed in terms of entire lives, emotionally, physically, financially, and was working to rebuild that up. And this Rabbi Junik said to him, how do you do this? Please, how do you do this? And the Rebbe said, I trained myself to look at everything in a positive way. He said, if I didn't train myself to see things in a positive way, I could not have survived my life. And that's a very, very profound lesson for all of us, because it means and a lot of times he would advise people to look at this book on Emunah I reference in my book. And the book basically it says, once you understand and fully integrate and take into your essence that everything that comes into this world and comes into your life comes from God, and God is only good. And then all what you need to be able to do is to understand that if you can't see the goodness now, it will come, but work on seeing the goodness now. Don't wait for it to be, smacking your face. You can start looking at it now. And I quote Viktor Frankl in the book, and he basically, he's a concentration camp survivor and the founder of logo medicine, psychology.
Logotherapy.
logotherapy. And I'm like, he basically said in any given set of circumstances, no matter what it is, what they can't take away from you is your ability to how you look at the situation, how you take and describe the situation to yourself.
You internalize it.
Exactly. So that's
amazing.
And we have choices.
Right. Okay. So you're basically it's not that the meditation builds emunah, builds positive thinking. What it does is it puts us in a state so that we can build those things, or we can improve our focus during davening or learning or whatever we're trying to endeavor to do. The meditation will assist us in all those activities.
Exactly. Let's just, for a little bit more on background. I didn't know if the Rebbe had any interest at all in meditation until 2015, when I happened to be reading a biography of the Rebbe called "Turning Judaism Outward" by Rabbi Chaim Miller. And there were 7 pages in there about the Rebbe and meditation, and how he considered transcendental meditation a plague that wasn't even listed in the Torah. I had no idea about any of this. And I started doing research on it. And I found that there was a memo that he sent to 50 psychiatrists in 1978, 79, psychiatrists, mental health professionals, psychologists, imploring them to come up with a kosher, secular meditation to deal with stress. And he, in the memo, he deals with 2 issues. He said one is, and he names transcendental meditation, and he says yoga and oriental meditations are all avodah. No question about that. However, and here's what's very interesting. There were many major rabbis, including the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel at the time, who were condemning all Eastern meditations as avodah zarah outright. They sucked in, this is usher, it's forbidden, stay away from it. The Rebbe was very nuanced. He didn't do that. He said, look, there are problematic areas with these, but the core technique, there is healing ability within it. And I want, and the strongest part, you can't even imagine how strong his language was. Well, in the book, I actually have the memo. So it's but he is imploring physicians to develop kosher meditation techniques to deal with stress. And he said that will have a 2-fold purpose. One is it will help people deal with the stress in their life, and who are having problems with financial overwhelming or shalom bias, or with children, or whatever the issues are. People need help to deal with that. And then he said it will also be something that will be able to wean away the Jewish kids and adults who have gotten involved in these Hindu meditations, or at least give an alternative to those who are seeking help with stress. And he was very confident that if people have a choice between getting help in a Jewish source and a non-Jewish source, many will take the Jewish source. So it was a 2-fold thing. People need help, and also it will help get people out of the cults and stuff like that. And the other thing, he was very, very specific. He had guidelines. Meditation wasn't for everybody. It was for people who were highly stressed. It wasn't a lifetime thing. He didn't do it forever. Basically, it was he looked at it like a prescription medicine. He said too little won't be effective. Too much is going to be damaging. And when the symptoms go resolve, stop. Just don't discontinue it. If they come back and start it again. But it wasn't like a lifetime start meditating and do it forever. It was basically very targeted to deal with a set of symptoms and resolve it. It was very, very practical. And he was very, very, very clear that this had nothing to do with the kinds of mystical meditations that are really foundational to Judaism. And he was also clear that it wasn't the meditations that were being described by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, alav shalom, who had a number of books about Jewish meditation. He said, this is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something to deal with stress.
And you've had a lot of success helping people who have probably one of the most stressful situations that anyone can imagine. That is you mentioned to me the first responders in Israel. I believe you said the organization's is Azaka.
So this is very exciting, actually. I haven't had success with Zaka, but I've been working with the woman who is in charge of resilience training for Zaka volunteers. Actually, she was kind enough to write a haskama for an endorsement for my book. And what Zaka, they're the first responders to every incident in Israel. They're the ones who go in the explosions and they gather up every piece of tissue to basically be able to bury people properly and identify people. And she says clearly that the stress that they deal with on an almost daily basis are situations that most of us never, ever, thank God, deal with in our lives. And it takes a toll on them and their families. So she heard about this meditation, and she's asked me to, first of all, to teach it to her. And also she wants me to develop an app that would be used with the Zaka volunteers to train them in meditation, which she thinks would be helpful. So that's what it's one of the things I'll be working on, is developing an app. And if anybody has any ability to do that, I don't, please contact me. And
we'll make sure there's a place in the show notes where any technological savvy person that wants to help you out has a way to contact you.
Yeah, that'll be great. So hopefully, we have stress in America. Like what's going on in Israel is like unbelievable. Israel, in terms of many parameters, is the second highest stressed country in the world. The number of new cases of post-traumatic stress disorder is minimum like 30, 40, 50,000, with a system that's already overloaded in terms of treatment. And the other problem is that whereas many psychotherapies and different mental health treatments maybe have something approaching a 70% success rate, however that's defined, post-traumatic stress disorder is much more difficult. It's probably the numbers are around 40, 45%. And this meditation is probably as effective as the treatment of choice, which is CBT, which is I'm blocking what it is, but it's essentially like a cognitive behavioral therapy, long form, and it's quite useful, but it doesn't do the trick. It works very well. For others, it doesn't do the trick. So essentially, what I'm trying to do now is also create this website I mentioned, which will be like a smorgasbord of self-help tools. I want it right now. It's like in the infant stages. I mentioned it's koshercalm.org. We have a lot of stuff up there, but there's a lot to come. But then I also want to do a Hebrew version of it so that it's available in Israel. Also want to translate the book into Hebrew and make it available in Israel. And the animations that I mentioned are two animations. Right now they're on the website. And one is like in English, one's in Hebrew. And they essentially are how to do kosher meditation. When you're talking about meditation, it's kind of hard to do it from a book. And as hard as I tried, and I had people who were very experienced meditators go through my descriptions, and I think the descriptions are pretty good, but I think the animations really bring it home. And so if somebody watches the animation and gets themselves set up properly, they'll be able to do it. So that's it.
Great. Yeah, I did. Like I said, I watched it today. I'm really excited to really delve into this book more and begin practicing it. I can tell you right now, I would personally benefit from devoting a couple of slots of 20 minutes a day to quieting my mind at this point, because I have the feeling of being overwhelmed is something that I think many of us experience when there's a lot of things we're trying to get accomplished and do, and get a little overwhelming, and sometimes you feel a little exhausted, and it seems like this can really help just sort of clear our mind, make us more productive, and really recharge our body.
Yeah, that's the point, is to recharge, get rid of stress, but that automatically allows you to have greater focus. And you don't have to start with like 20 minutes twice a day. You can start with, whatever's comfortable, like 10 minutes, 7 minutes. But the point is, if you start it, to start it when you have a block of time where like at least like a week where you can really do it twice a day. And the book really describes how to set up the environment much more than the animation, and also talks more about which focus words to use. But you basically have choice of like an English focus word like calm or peace or whatever those words are, and a number of Hebrew choices: shalom, shema, emuna. So like or you can make up your own word. Just
Right.
whatever resonates with you. But
I would
the
encourage listeners of the Shema podcast to use Shema, uh, just to continually plug my show. Okay, that's
Shema
it's
is
great.
like, in fact, the Rebbe mentioned the Shema as being one of the words that he would recommend. It's very interesting. So I think that this meditation is something the Rebbe was looking for and never quite found. The reason I say that is when he was looking for a secular meditation that was effective. In 1975, the Benson technique was, there's no question the Rebbe knew about that technique. No, it was a best-selling book. The Rebbe knew about obscure articles in journals in wherever. He certainly knew about a New York Times bestseller on a topic that he was very interested in since 1962. He knew about it, but he didn't say, okay, this is it. There was a friend of mine who was going to on a sabbatical with her husband. He was a math professor, and they had a choice to go to a couple of countries, and he told them to go. One of the choices was I forget which. It was like one of the countries that was a Buddhist country, and he told the wife, who was very close to the Rebbe, to come up with a parv meditation, a neutral meditation. So, and that was like in 1981 or so. So the Rebbe knew about this other meditation from Benson for 5 years already, and he was still sending somebody out to find a parv meditation. He didn't stop looking for what he wanted. And I think there were two things about Benson and it's very, very, I say with trepidation for me to say what I think the Rebbe might have been thinking, but I'll say it anyway. But it is with like great trepidation that I say it. But I think what is possible was the Rebbe thought that the Benson meditation, because it was a Harvard physician in a white coat, would not have the cachet of the Eastern meditations and the woo woo hoo hoo attraction part of it. So I think
Right.
that might have been it. And then he might have foresaw what has happened with the Benson Henry Institute. Their main focus is identifying different things that trigger the relaxation response. So they have a lot of information about yoga, about Tai Chi, about mindfulness, whatever. And all of these things from a Jewish point of view are very problematic.
Right.
So, in fact, I actually had recommended somebody to like go to the Benson technique, the Benson website, because he teaches the technique there. And the guy wrote me back and said, "Why'd you send me there? It's filled with avodah zarah." And I said, "Yeah, you've got a point." So at least with what I'm doing, the technique works. It's powerful, and there's none of the avodah zarah. So
Beautiful. I appreciate you making this book and bringing this to us. I agree. There's so many benefits to it, and there's a kosher way to do it. And I appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us, so we can know how to use this tool in our life to help us with the stresses that I think everyone endures in one area of their life or another.
that's the whole point of the whole thing. So I appreciate and thank you very much for having me on, and really hope to share more and more success in your broadcast and your podcast. And we should all go from strength to strength.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed the episode and found it meaningful, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast. To share feedback, suggest future topics, or ask questions for the host or his guests, you can email him at shemapodcastshow@gmail.com. That is shemapodcastshow@gmail.com, or click the show notes to join the growing WhatsApp community.